Hello, everybody. Mike Donahue here with my friend, your friend.
Brian May,
We
still
are,
today.
he's still Brian May. I can't believe it. We are, this is the follow up to the bomb that went off 2 days ago. Actually, we're recording this on a Tuesday. We did get some feedback from the podcast, nothing from on a negative side of things, but we did get um, some comments. But before we get into that, I want to say this. First of all, neither Brian and I knew Eileen was going to make that allegation. That's the truth. We brought her on because she has history, shared history in Bellevue, shared history in Rockford, and the thing that I thought she was going to talk about, which she did later, was the fact that when she tried to expose some things that were going on in the school in Rockford, she was shut down by administration. So she did talk about that. But before she talked about that, she basically unleashed this allegation that Jeannie had told her that she had had a sexual relationship with a student at Bellevue Christian Academy, Bellevue Christian High School in Bellevue, Nebraska. And Brian and I both were like, oh my gosh, we didn't know. So we had heard allegations. I had
Right.
heard rumors about this incident happening, but I did not know that Eileen actually confronted Jeannie, and Jeannie actually admitted, according to Eileen, that she did this. And so when that bomb went off, we were both like, oh boy. And you saw me go like this. I was like, I was really like, that's the way I felt. Like there was a bomb going off. So the next day, that was recorded on Friday. On Saturday, Brian and I both hit the phones and started making some calls to people that we wanted to make sure, first of all, that those allegations were true. And though we did not hear from the victim himself, we heard from people that were very close to him that confirmed that he at least said that to them on several occasions. So
Yep.
we we were confident then to put that on the air, because on the podcast, because first of all, Eileen's very credible. Eileen Delahanty, I've never known her to say anything that wasn't true. So when she said that, I tend to believe her. And then again, we did our due diligence by following up to find out if this is left field or if this is something that could have happened. And so yeah, so we're fairly confident that airing that was the right thing to do. So Brian, we did get a comment, and the comment was from somebody up in Rockford who I actually know, this individual. He basically said, you know, we how come so, I'm going to paraphrase this, but basically how come so many strong people up in Rockford and in Bellevue, stayed silent, stayed quiet when we knew some of these things were happening, whether it was a cover up or was it her doing it herself. Why did people stay quiet?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and there's so many different angles you could take on that. I know my own story is that, frankly, I was teaching, I don't know, 30, 35 years ago, and a lot of these things I did not know until inside the last 2 years. I do know there were a lot of students that knew a lot of things, heard a lot of things. I knew that this particular story was sort of in the lore, but I didn't even come around to that until that last couple of years. So a lot of it is that they were really good at keeping things quiet. And when you're really good at keeping things quiet, and yet, someone in your orbit encounters this kind of abuse or this kinds of situation, it's really easy to feel isolated and alone, like you're the only one. And will anyone believe me because they have, this person has such a great reputation, and it's just me against this person's word. And yeah, I think that's part of what's going on here.
Yeah, that installation process, and I talked about it in my book, that a lot of leaders use, not just Jeannie, but it's that they keep in that small group around you. They know the narrative, they know what to say, so they push out. In full disclosure, I was part of that in Rockford. I mean, I didn't know I didn't know what Eileen was talking about. When Eileen said that I had overheard a conversation, I did overhear a conversation, but I didn't know the content of the conversation. I was trained by Jeannie to think that any attack on her, any rumor
Yeah,
on her was an assault on the kingdom of God, was, coming against what God was doing in her life. And that's what we were totally pumped. We were told all the time that, these attacks are coming, and that's what happens to men and women of God who are doing God's will. And so you just believed it. I was a young
right.
Christian, you know, really I was a young Christian, even though I was a leader of a big youth group, or assistant leader. I was a young Christian. I was probably a Christian for 3 4 years, and in leadership for a couple of years. So I just believed it.
Yeah,
And I think that's one of the things that that they use as the insulation process. Get the
right.
entourage around you to say, to deflect these truths. So like if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, I heard you needed this," I would say, "No way, what are you talking about?" you know that's just an attack. And then that person would probably go away. And that's there you go, you just shut down the truth, and you didn't even know you were doing that.
Right. Yeah, that's the real circle the wagons mentality. I think you brought up a really good point. The culture and the ethos around there was that if you came against a leader, you were coming against God himself, because this person was allegedly God's anointed one, right? They had special stature in the kingdom, and I mean, who wants to take on, God's anointed? I'm speaking
Right.
sarcastically, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, for those of you that don't understand that, it really was in the culture that you
Yeah,
would. It was a big deal for you to call somebody out. It
yeah,
wasn't. It was a huge deal. Like
yeah,
it was like today, you just call people out. You get on the internet and do what we're doing, right? You just call people out. But back in the
yeah,
day, that was holy ground. That was like, you better have your ducks in a row before
right,
you go do anything. And again, when you have your ducks in a row, but you still meet that insulation process, whether it's victimization, whether it's what I said about putting the entourage around you, the God said stuff,
hmm, yeah,
the spiritual aspect of it, the guilt, the shame, all that kind of stuff. Even if you had your ducks in a row, you got hit with that.
right.
So, you know,
Well, and there was an emotional price to be paid too if you did that, because if you challenged, the authority and you challenged the inner circle, you stood a pretty good chance of being ostracized, of being, pushed out, of becoming, precious, as we've talked about before on this podcast.
yeah. I had dinner last night with somebody who worked really close with her in Atlanta. I didn't know this person. I met him a few times, but we had dinner last night, and he told me that. He said prior, about 3 4 years prior to him leaving there, he started to confront her. He was the golden child for a long time, and then he started to confront her on some of the lies, and he specifically called her out on lying and gossiping. And she would try to publicly humiliate him. That's another tactic that she had. That she would to your face say, "Oh, thank you for telling me that," and then there'd be something snide said in front of a leadership meeting, in front of all your peers, and you knew she was communicating with you. She was trying to send you a message. Do not. I had that happen to me a few times. Do not confront me. And that he talked about that, and he said, little by little, she started to really shove him out because he was calling her out on some of the things that he saw. And again, he said, I was lonely. I felt like I was losing my friends because she went to some of them and said, "Hey, be careful of him. He's evil now." And he wasn't in the room to defend himself. I mean, there's so many biblical like violations there,
Right,
slander, gossip. There's a reason why you put two people in a room and talk about the issues instead of just one, the a single narrative going out there. It's awful, what she would do to basically send you the message: do not confront me, do
right.
not go against this narrative that I have, because I will make you pay.
Yeah,
And I was, I was the brunt of that, and so was this
yeah,
person.
yeah, yeah. And, and to be frank, when you get drawn into that circle, you want to be in that circle. You want to feel good. You don't want it because it feels good. You don't want to be pushed out. But gradually the light comes on. Mike, I think it's interesting, and we may go a little longer than 10 minutes tonight, but I think it's interesting that when the whole thing came down in Atlanta at the Atlanta Leadership College, and the folks started the Change.org website, it was like somebody just broke the dam, right? There was all of this pent up emotion and all of this pent up pain and all these pent up hurts. And I haven't looked at it in a while, but there are literally hundreds of comments on that change.org site where people began to come out and tell their stories. Why do you suppose that happened?
I think they were waiting for something like that to happen. I think they were, she got basically caught with her hand in the cookie jar because she knew some things that were going on with this individual. And when she said she didn't, she was basically scapegoating this guy, this Jordan guy. She was scapegoating him. I'm not saying that what, the allegations, aren't true. I'm really unclear on that. But what was clear to me was that she basically pinned everything on him. And the change.org stuff, and there's another Facebook page that is dedicated to the victims of Jeannie Mayo specifically. They don't talk about this Jordan guy a lot. There's a few things about him, but most of it is about her and the things that she did manipulation wise and lying, gossiping, slandering, things like that, covering up, perpetration from, all kinds of stuff. And so that was about her. And I think, now she's trying to, I've heard that she's trying to scapegoat this guy. And so, again, he's got to take responsibility for what he did, whatever he did. But bottom line is she's piling all of that on him, going, see, my ministry's ruined because of what this guy did. No, these people came forward from Bellevue all the way to Atlanta, Rockford, the whole thing, and said, no, I'm calling foul on this, Ichabod.
Yeah.
This is a disgrace to the kingdom of God, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's really important for people to tell their stories. I mean, it's out there now. And I think one of the things that happens when someone like that tells their story, it does two things to other people who have suffered similar kinds of things. It opens them up to say, hey, maybe it wasn't me, maybe it was them, like we talk about a lot. And I think it empowers them to speak out. And the more people who speak out and tell their story, the more people that hear that and their light comes on and they begin to find a pathway to deal with the damage that was done in those situations. That's really huge, I think.
That's exactly right. I talked to a guy today that has a story, and he's waiting, and he's got a hell of a story. And he basically just said, I'm gonna tell it, but I'm waiting for the dominoes to fall. And he said, we got to get the dominoes on the same table. And I thought that was great what he said. And to echo what you're saying, listen, if you're out there and you're watching these podcasts and you have a story, tell your story. You can come on here, tell it. We'll vet it. We'll make sure we'll make sure it's okay. But come in and tell it, because it's important that you have a platform. This is what this is about. This podcast is not about slamming people, hurting people. This is for you to come on here and tell your story. And it's also for Jeannie Mayo, if she wants to come on here and own these many transgressions. This isn't like 2 or 3, not even 30 or 40. This is hundreds of people coming on and saying, she did this, she did that, and she said this, and this hurt me. And some of them are pretty damning. They're hurtful. They're bad. And she can come on here anytime she wants and confess and deal with it, and we'll move on. But this needs to be a place where people feel safe, where they can talk about what happened to them.
Right. And yeah, I couldn't have said it better.
Awesome. Well, hey, keep those comments coming, and if they're private, that's fine. You can email us. You can put it on the page. Doesn't matter. So thank you so much, everybody, and we'll see you Sunday night. You never know what's going to happen here on the podcast. We don't either, apparently. So,
Apparently.
all right, everybody, have a good night.
Have a good night, all.